Hello, dear friends. Shavua Tov. May this be a good week. I'm talking to you after Parashat Shmini. That's from Leviticus, Vayikra. And one of the main topics of this week's parasha, of course, the laws, what we call the kosher laws, the laws of the pure and impure animals as they are called in the Torah, the tahor and the tameh, what is allowed to be eaten. Now, the question is, why are these laws being brought in Vayikra? Vayikra is called Torat Kohanim, the book of the priests. In fact, also in Greek, Leviticus, the book of the Levites. So it's usually about things in the temple. But kosher is something we eat at home. It's not necessarily directly related to the temple. So there, the answer could be that, of course, the offerings that we bring in the temple have to be tahor, they have to be kosher. On the other hand, there are also things that the kosher laws deal with, which are not brought to the temple, like fish. What's a tahor fish? What's a pure fish? And what is an impure fish? What is a kosher one, non-kosher one? That's not directly connected to the temple. There are also certain kosher animals which are not necessarily brought in the temple. So what does that actually mean? This sort of connects also to something I talked about earlier, in that the idea of the korbanot, the uniqueness of the offerings brought in the temple, and one of the unique things in the offerings brought in the temple is that they were eaten. Aside from those which are brought from the priests on a daily basis, what's called the olah in the morning and the evening, but what people brought to the temple were always eaten by that person, by the kohen, and the blood was sprinkled on the corners of the altar in many cases. But the point is that it was eaten by the person who brought it, what we call shlamim, or peace offerings. So this was very unique because in other cultures, the idea of bringing an offering was bringing it to God, or in their traditions, gods that they would give it to. It was sort of like, if you want like an indulgence, you give it to the god, and then they're going to forgive you. But in the biblical concept, no, it's eating before God. There's also the concept, of course, of pardon, of slicha, forgiveness, kapara, atonement, of course. But it's something unique, this idea of eating before God. And in a past talk, I also mentioned that it seems to me that before the Chet HaEgel, before the sin of the golden calf, the idea really was to eat before God. Because as I said, all of the sacrificial service is mentioned basically in Leviticus, but the tabernacle itself, the Mishkan, is built in the book of Exodus. And there's not much detail about the korbanot, about the offerings at all, which give the feeling then that maybe the idea of building the temple or building the sanctuary, the Mishkan, was in order to have a place which is a meeting place between man and God. Like it says, Vasuli mikdash, v'shachanti betocham, they shall make unto me a temple, and I will dwell within their midst, which was the goal. I spoke about this before, and I will not elaborate anymore at this point, but I do want to talk about a little bit about kashrut. Now, eating kosher is something which follows us through our lives because, of course, people eat 3 times a day, actually sometimes more, so it really follows you all the time. And I want to point out something about kashrut, which is, I think, very interesting. When you look at the book of Genesis, of course, you have the flood. The flood with Noah in chapter 7 of Genesis, of Bereshit, verse 2. God says to Noah, which animals to bring to the ark? Mikola behema Torah, all the pure animals, you shall take 7 by 7. But the animals which are not pure, take 2 by 2. Now, everybody talks about that Noah brings into the ark the animals 2 by 2. But that's not what it says. The non-tahor animals, the non-pure animals, what's called the non-kosher animals, were 2 by 2. The pure animals, or what today we call the kosher animals, were 7 by 7. The animals and the birds. And it also says that in verse 3, also from the birds of the heaven, 7 by 7, if they are going to be tahor, if they are pure. And after the flood, when the flood is over in chapter 8, so it says in chapter 8 that Noah, verse 18, Noah leaves the ark with his wife and his children and their spouses, and with all the animals and all the birds. And then Noah in verse 20 builds an altar for God, and he brings from all the pure animals and all the pure birds as an offering on this altar to God. So the immediate question is, how did Noah know what a pure animal was and a non-pure animal, or what we call a kosher and a non-kosher animal, if it's only mentioned in Vayikra and Leviticus? This is the book of Genesis. So how does he know? Leviticus is given more than 1,000 years later after Noah. So how does he know? Well, I'm going to assume then, if we look in the Bible, first of all, according to most of the commentaries, people were actually mankind, according to all the biblical commentaries, at least the Jewish biblical commentaries, mankind was vegetarian until the time of Noah. Why? Because Adam and Eve were in a garden, and in their garden, they're told that they can eat from anything that grows from any one of the trees of the garden, which could be also included plants. But the point is, if you're not told you can eat an animal, why should you think you could? And when we look in the Bible in antiquity, there's no mention of eating animals until Noah. There is mention of giving offerings to God. If you remember, Cain offers from the fruit of the ground, meaning vegetables, and Abel gives a sheep to God, offers up a sheep. By the way, a sheep is a kosher animal. And later on, later on in Abraham, which is after Noah already, but Abraham, when he gives an offering to God, it's also what we would call pure animals. Even the bird that he uses, the turtle dove, are all pure animals, or what we call in modern times kosher animals. So it seems that in antiquity, what we call today, what the Torah calls pure animals, they knew about already, because those were the offerings they were giving to God. Meaning when Noah gave an offering, according to the Midrash, even Adam did, but it's not in the text, or Abraham, or when they give offerings, it was always a tahor animal. It was always a pure animal. Now, Noah is told for the first time in chapter 9, by the way, that he can eat any animal, which is the proof that they used to show that obviously mankind was vegetarian up to this point. As the verse says, chapter 9, verse 3, any roaming animal, remes, which is alive, you can now eat. Just like the grass, I have given you everything. Meaning until now, you ate herbs or fruit. Now you can also eat animals. And then right away, in the next verse, it says, well, let's say verse 6, but if you kill a person, then you will get the death penalty. Meaning animals you can kill to eat, people. There's a whole discussion about that by Rabbi Cook, which I don't want to enter. But the point is, until now, it appears they didn't eat animals. And God is telling Noah, from now on, you can eat animals. So, when Noah knows about tahor birds and not tahor birds, pure and impure, or pure and impure animals, it's strictly for the idea, until now, of giving an offering to God. They had no limitation at this point from chapter 9 and further. They had no limitation on what animal they could eat. They're not told they have to eat a pure animal and not eat a non-pure animal. They're told anyone. But they knew that pure animals, only those are the ones that are given to God. So why in the book of Leviticus and Vayikra are the people of Israel told that they can only eat pure animals all of a sudden? What is the point of that? The point of that is that it's an extension of what the Torah says in the book of Exodus, where it says, "Vatem tiyuli mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh ele hadvarim asher tedaber b'nei Israel." When God says through Moses, "You shall be unto me mamlechet kohanim," a nation, a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. This is what you shall tell the children of Israel. Which means the priests are the ones who, if anybody partakes in an offering, it's only the priest in antiquity. Usually it's given to God, but the priest is there. When God says you are now a kingdom of priests, it means the reason why I'm giving you these kosher laws is now I see you like the priests of the temple. You are the priest for the rest of the nations. You can only eat the offerings that are brought in the temple, or that could be brought in the temple. Of course, there are things that we can eat, but they must be tahor animals and were not brought in the temple, like fish. As far as we know, fish were not brought in the temple. But the point is, the only animals we can eat are animals which are pure. And the only animals that are brought in the temple are pure animals. So that the laws of the kashrut, of the kosher, are an extension of what is done in antiquity as a religious ceremony, and later on in the temple, or the Mishkan, or the tabernacle. Understanding this is again understanding that the idea of kashrut is based on this idea that when I eat, I'm eating in a way where I am being cognizant of my relationship to God by only taking certain animals. And the blessings that we make over the various foods are also involving God, even in this most mundane thing, which is consuming something for our sustenance. Because the whole idea of the Torah is bringing holiness into the day-to-day. And in that sense, kashrut itself, the laws of what we eat, of our dietary laws, become an act of holiness. And especially on the holidays, on the Sabbaths, on the Shabbat, on the Chagim, on the holidays and the festivals, when we have special meals. And that way we bring this type of kedusha, this type of sanctity into our homes, into our communities, and into our families. Shalom, shalom.